Welcome to CommercialDrones.fm, the podcast that explores the commercial drone industry, the people who power it, and the concepts that drive it. I'm your host, Ian Smith. Hey everybody, and welcome to CommercialDrones.fm. Today I've got a really special guest, one of the first on the show. We've got Kevin Spain with Emergence Capital Partners out of San Mateo, California. He's previously worked at Microsoft, Electronic Arts, been the founder and CEO of a company called @Madison, not Ashley Madison, and currently sits as board member for 7 companies, including Drone Deploy, Crunchbase, and Doximity. So thanks very much for coming, Kevin.
Thanks for having me, and great to be here.
Absolutely. So I'd like to start off, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe your background, and what is Emergence Capital?
Sure. Happy to do that. So I've been in venture now for about 10 years. In fact, it'll be 10 years in September. I've been with Emergence Capital that entire time, and we are a venture fund that focuses exclusively on enterprise technology companies. So the founding thesis of the firm was that there would be a never-ending series of technological innovations that, when brought into the business world, would make a tremendous impact on how business is done. The first of those themes, the first of those technologies that we really bet on in a big way at Emergence was what we now think of as the cloud, or SaaS. If you rewind 10 years ago, there was not a lot of emphasis in the venture community on what we now think of as software as a service. In fact, the term didn't even really exist. But the founders of the firm, my 3 partners, who I joined initially, they really believed that this was going to be a big technological trend, and we bet very heavily against that. So our first investment was in Salesforce.com, great way to get started. We've backed other SaaS leaders like Box and Yammer and SuccessFactors and Viva Systems, and so that has been a massive technology wave that has impacted business, obviously, in a very big way over the last 10 years. That doesn't show any signs of slowing down, but we know that there are new innovations all the time that are emerging, whether it be drones or machine learning, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, smartphones, tablets, you name it, that are making a big impact and will make a big impact on the enterprise. And we want to be ahead of the curve in the investment community when it comes to thinking about which technologies are going to have a big impact and then backing the best companies that are capitalizing on those innovations. So that's what we do at Emergence.
Gotcha. And so you're not just talking the talk, from what I understand. You're walking the walk, as in you're not just investing in a drone company, you actually own some drones yourself.
I do. Yeah, I do. I mean, this was actually the genesis, I think, of my interest in Drone Deploy. Going back a few years, I started building some of my own quadcopters. I mean, it was just a hobby, right? And certainly no one was really talking or thinking about the use of quadcopters or drones in business back 3-4 years ago. But I was intrigued, and frankly, I was looking for some projects to do with my kids, and so it was sort of a fun toy when you're in Silicon Valley. Build a drone with your kids. That seems like an obvious thing to do, and so started by buying a kit online. Was lucky enough to sort of get turned on to what some folks are doing in terms of the kit drone world. And bought a TBS Discovery Pro initially, which was a ton of fun to build. It was very challenging for me to build. I hadn't picked up a soldering iron in I don't know how long, and had to figure it out. And I was blown away, right, that I could actually build something, from sort of off-the-shelf components that would actually fly around. And so that sort of was the genesis of the hobby. But certainly for me, at least, something that starts as a hobby oftentimes ends up bleeding into my work life. And I'm sort of fortunate in the sense that I work in an industry where sometimes hobbies can actually turn into real investment opportunities. So I started getting very interested in what was happening in the commercial drone space and began talking to a lot of companies that were building, frankly, some of the first solutions to help businesses get more value or get value at all out of quadcopters and other things that fly around. And so I met Drone Deploy, Mike and Nick and Jono right as they were coming out of AngelPad. So, they had just gotten started, and they were one of the very first companies I saw that had this idea of building really a software-only solution, right, for the commercial drone industry, which I thought was really compelling and interesting for reasons we can talk about. But yeah, my interest in the space goes back several years as I was just sort of toying around and playing with drones in my spare time.
So this was back in 2013 or so.
Yeah.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, most of the companies, so that's what you were saying, is that the software only play was a little bit hard to come by. Most companies were still trying to do hardware, trying to keep up with DJI, or at that point, DJI wasn't even really ahead by too much as it is today. So do you see a big shift in new company investment opportunities on where they're really focusing, whether it's hardware or software?
Sure. I think, Ian, you bring up a really good point, which is, several years ago, not even that many years ago, but 3 years ago, 4 years ago, certainly, if you wanted to build a company in the commercial drone space, you almost didn't have a choice but to build your own hardware, right? DJI was sort of a fledgling company 3 or 4 years ago. It's sort of funny to think about at this point because they've become so big, but they were just getting started. They didn't have an open platform, right, like they do today, where a developer can build a solution that interfaces with their hardware. And so if you wanted to build anything in the commercial drone space, you were probably building your own hardware. You might be building your own software that integrates with your own hardware. But the notion of building a software-only commercial drone company 3 years ago was frankly a little crazy, right? It's sort of what I liked about Drone Deploy when I first got to know the business. It's like, the founders of this company had a vision for where the industry was going to go. It wasn't necessarily where the industry was at that moment. And you're right. Clearly, other companies were thinking very differently.
Great. So just to let the audience know, we are sitting in Drone Deploy HQ right now. So if you do hear some random buzzing in the background or a dog that barges into the conference room, just go ahead and ignore that. So was the plan always to find a drone company to invest in, or did this kind of just come across your desk and then you were like, well, hey, wait a second, this is something I really like? Were you guys actively searching for a drone company? I
would say the way that we tend to think at Emergence is sort of thematic in nature. So, I was sort of telling the story of the founding of the firm. I mean, the firm was founded on the basis of a theme, which was, again, next-gen technologies intersecting with the enterprise. The first of those was cloud for us. And we have a pattern, even since then, of coming up with thematic areas that we want to pursue and where we actively look for new investments. I will say at the time that we were and I was exploring the commercial drone space, initially, this had not yet risen to what I would call a major theme at Emergence, right? We were intrigued with the opportunity. I personally felt that there was ultimately going to be a very interesting investment opportunity in the market. But there wasn't enough evidence at that point to sort of say, look, this should be a major theme for the firm, either in terms of market adoption, in terms of money being spent on the space. It was a little bit speculative. And so sometimes it goes that way for us at Emergence. Sometimes we had the luxury of building a theme over an extended period of time and waiting for a lot of evidence and a lot of data to emerge to support it. And other times we have a bit of a hunch, right? Where we think a space is interesting, and for one reason or another, maybe it's because of a personal passion of a partner, or it's because of some things that we see in terms of how a company is pursuing the solution to a problem, or the team itself, or sometimes a combination of all of those things, we decide that an emerging space, sort of a hunch space, is one that is worth making an investment in.
Cool. That's good to learn some of the background. Sometimes it can be a personal hunch, and it looks like it's starting to pay off. So going back to this kind of switch from a lot of hardware to more software companies. So just today and yesterday, I stumbled across an ag analytics platform called Resin, closed an $11 million Series B investment led by Monsanto, and another company called DroneBase, which is like a commercial drone marketplace, closed a $6.8 million round. So I think that was just in the past 2 days from today. So I think that kind of illustrates what you were saying is now, there's so much more ways to augment the hardware with software. So, and, to kind of move on from that point, the VC investment in the drone industry grew steadily starting in, I think, like 2011, 2012 to nearly $500 million over 74 deals in 2015, where it actually plateaued. So it's looking a little bit down, although with these two last investments, one isn't really a drone company per se, but it could be lumped in there. What do you think are the reasons for this? Why do you think there was this like huge meteoric rise and now it's slowing down a little bit, or it's seeming to trend downwards a little?
Well, so I think Ian, there are probably a couple things going on there. First of all, my guess is last year that probably includes a big round that DJI raised. I could be wrong about that, but clearly the early companies in this market that have gained traction in terms of revenue have been hardware companies, right? And the hardware in this industry is a necessary precursor, right, for the eventual success of software in the commercial drone space. And so you've seen a lot of funding go into hardware companies. And let's face it, hardware companies have to raise a lot of money, right? Because they are fundamentally less capital efficient than software companies. So I think that's part of what's happening is sort of you had the initial funding that sort of went into a lot of the early leaders in hardware. And now a lot of those leaders are established and you're finding a little bit less money going into them. And instead, I think you're starting to see the venture dollars begin to flow into software. And again, software is more capital efficient, so you don't have to raise rounds that are quite as big. So
unless you're in San Francisco.
Unless the money's available, sometimes that happens. But on balance, I think software companies can raise less capital than hardware companies to get to meaningful scale. And so I think we're entering a new phase of the market, right, where the venture dollars are going to software companies. Those companies don't have to raise as much money to get to really meaningful scale and interesting businesses. So I think that's one thing that's happened. I think something else that has happened is that the venture market in general, right, putting drones aside for a moment, has sort of plateaued a bit since 2015, right? And in fact, some of the latest data I saw, I think this was just through the end of Q1, showed that aggregate venture investment in the United States was down a bit in Q1 of this year versus Q1 of last year. And I think in part that's due to some uncertainty in the public markets. You certainly saw in Q1, the NASDAQ and the Dow suffered some pretty significant losses. They're sort of back now a little bit, but I think venture funding in general in 2016 has been a bit slower than it was in 2015. So that may be a little bit of a contributing factor as well. But what I will say overall is that as I go out and I talk to my colleagues in venture at a lot of the best firms in Silicon Valley, there is a tremendous amount of interest in the drone space. A number of firms have already made investments in the drone market in one way, shape, or form. A lot of firms have not. And I think now, versus when we invested in Drone Deploy last year, it's becoming more obvious, right? That this is a real market with real potential, with companies that are starting to get some nice scale. And so my hunch is, as we get into the last half of 2016, we're going to see the number of firms that want to get into exciting drone companies really begin to grow.
Yeah, it's been exciting, to say the least, to see how much the industry has grown, and especially with Part 107 being announced, that's just going to really open up the floodgates for businesses of all sizes, not just enterprise. So we're going to see some really cool stuff there, and we'll kind of touch on Part 107 a little bit later. But I wanted to ask, so for anybody that's listening to this program, maybe they're a fledgling drone startup or they just have a really cool idea, what kind of advice would you give someone who's looking to start a drone company? Where would you start?
Well, that's a $1 million question, I guess, or the $10 million question, depending upon your fundraising aspirations. I don't know. Look, I think in some ways you have to think about building a successful drone technology company in the same way you think about building a successful any kind of technology company. You have to have a really great team, right, that knows how to build products that really perform and that customers really love. You've got to have an idea about how to solve a problem that ideally is unique, right? That no one else is really solving or not solving in as good a way as you think you can solve it. You have to be going after a market, so a part of the market that is big enough, ideally, to support the creation of a really big business.
Some focus then.
Some focus, I think, is really important. But so I think that those are sort of the key elements, right? Mm-hmm. So a really great team, a problem that you're trying to solve that is meaningful, that you think you are uniquely capable of solving, and then a size of market that is meaningful enough to create a big company. And what I would say is, if you're not able to do all of those things, you may still be able to build a really nice, what I would call sort of a lifestyle business, right? Where you can go out in a growing market like the drone market, and you could be a drone service provider, right, as an example. Or you could build a small piece of technology that solves sort of a niche problem in the drone business, but is never going to become a huge company. And you could do that and build a great business that delivers a great income to you, may never become a $100 million or $1 billion business, but that's okay, right? That can be an incredibly rewarding business that provides it for a great lifestyle for you and allows you to do something you really love. Now, the thing about taking that path is that very few venture investors will be interested in backing you in that case. And so in that instance, you probably have to self-fund it, or you have to get some friends and family and other people to give you a little bit of capital to get the business going. But I think that's a path, whether you're building a drone startup or you're building another kind of technology company, you shouldn't discount it, right? Because
Absolutely.
There are some amazing companies that people bootstrap and turn into great lifestyle businesses. If you're going after venture money, you have to be going for the home run. You have to have all those elements lined up, and you have to be going after a really, really big market that's going to get venture investors excited.
It's a very, very valid point. I think it's easy when we live in the Bay Area, the Valley, we kind of can get caught up, especially in your line of work, with, how big was their A round and B round, et cetera. Whereas there's a lot of people out there that are just, bootstrapping their own company and starting it up. And it's extremely admirable. And it's also, it's another option out there. There's not always, you don't have to be the next DJI, or the next Parrot or something. Creating your own small sustainable company is just a really cool way of doing it as well. And that can provide just awesome returns and something, not to discount. So, mentioning earlier Part 107, the announcement there, obviously that brings long-awaited changes to this whole industry. I myself have been waiting a little over 3 years for this. What are your thoughts on the current state of the drone industry now that Part 107 has been announced? And what kind of implications do you feel that Part 107 will bring to the industry from kind of a high-level view?
Sure. Well, I've been waiting for this too, Ian. This was a big part of our thesis when we made the investment in Drone Deploy early last year. It was actually during the course of our doing our diligence on Drone Deploy that the draft rules actually were issued. And that was a huge step forward in and of itself. I think it was around February of last year.
That's right, yeah.
And that got us a lot more comfortable that at least the FAA was starting to think in a way that would actually be conducive to the creation of a really viable and vibrant commercial drone industry in the U.S. So that was a critical part of our decision-making process, but we still knew that this next step was ultimately going to be necessary, which was the issuance of the final rules. And so it was very exciting to see this week that finally happened. So we were jumping up and down as well in the same way that you were. But it's interesting. So when I look at the data on 333 exemptions, right, to date, and I think roughly there are somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 exemptions that have been issued, and about another 4,000 or 5,000 applications that have not yet been processed. And so it's interesting, like despite the incredibly onerous requirements that are there for a 333, you have 5,000 issued applications and about 5,000 applications in process. 10,000 individuals or companies out there that have said, I'm interested enough in the value that a drone can provide to my business that they're willing to invest the time, the energy to go down the 333 path. So if you sort of think about what is now going to happen with the requirements under 107, my guess is it's an order of magnitude or greater, so 10x or greater increase in number of individuals or companies out there that will be actively looking to take advantage of commercial drones. And my guess is a lot of those folks are already using drones for business. And we see that in certain places today. But the fact that there is now a path to doing that in a regulatory compliant way, I think is going to open the floodgates even more. And the place where I think it's going to have the biggest impact, frankly, is in the largest companies out there. So these enterprise class customers, the biggest companies in oil and gas, the biggest companies in agriculture, the biggest companies in construction, that frankly know that they want to have some comfort, right, around the regulations before they make a really big investment in a drone program. A lot of them have been making investments around the edges. But for them to sort of say, look, this is a key tool I want to use across my business, get executives signing off on it, allocating more big budget to it, having real clarity around how they can do that in a compliant way and in an easy way, I think is going to cause those bigger organizations to get even more excited about using drones. So that's where I see it having an impact. I think broadly, it's going to increase the size of the market opportunity in the US dramatically, and in particular with the largest organizations out there.
Quick thoughts on larger enterprises. So going back to the beginning, Emergence has a primary focus on the cloud. So we're going to see a lot of big companies using companies similar to Drone Deploy for a bunch of their very sensitive data. Security, privacy issues come into play. What have been, and I'll kind of merge this in with another question, and maybe it has some relevancy or not. But so privacy, security, big data, big companies, big money going on there. But then also, is there another industry that might have gone through something similar as the drone industry is going through in your mind in the past? I don't know if you have any way of tying those two questions together.
I mean, I think it's very similar. I mean, you sort of mentioned cloud earlier, right? I mean, we built our firm initially on this transition from on-premise software to cloud-based software, right? That was a big conceptual shift for a lot of large organizations, right? And initially, SaaS or cloud really started by being adopted by the smallest companies out there, right? Because the biggest companies didn't know what to do with it. They were a little bit afraid of it. They weren't sure if it was secure. A lot of issues that you just mentioned were definitely there when it came to software as a service for the largest companies. And that was an issue for quite a while, frankly, in software as a service. But eventually, those large organizations understood how compelling that business model was, how compelling that software delivery model was. And now you can't find a single large enterprise anywhere around the world that is saying, I'd rather do something on premise than in the cloud. Everyone understands that the benefits of the cloud are immense.
I think you just answered the second part of the question.
Yes, I think it's the exact same thing. The parallels are amazing, I think, in many ways, where, drones are a new technology, right? There were old ways of doing a lot of these things, largely with people. So in agriculture, you could have people walk the fields. In inspection, you could have people climb towers. So there was an old way of doing this stuff, and then a new way emerged, right? And that new way was by default new. It was a little scary. There were questions around security and how well it would work, and so. I think we're going to see enterprises go through the exact same thing. If the ROI is there and they can get comfortable with security and they can get comfortable with compliance, then I think you're going to see them, just dive in like crazy. And again, that's something we're already starting to see at Drone Deploy.
That's awesome. Wow. Okay. So now my mind is blown because I was always struggling to find what industry is this like? Is this like the internet where everyone was kind of apprehensive at first and then it became huge, but just SaaS companies, the cloud. That's really really interesting to think about. So can you explain your thoughts on some of the enterprise companies who may be starting to use drones in their business come late August, whenever this Part 107 is released? What kind of advice do you have for those kind of people, or those businesses rather, as in, what should they be looking for? Do you think maybe they're already looking at it?
Yeah. I mean, you're asking mostly from the technology provider perspective, or from the customer perspective?
From the customer perspective, from the enterprise company's point of view.
Got it. So I think from the enterprise company's point of view, you want a solution that is going to deliver value quickly, right? First and foremost. And again, this is sort of a mantra of most of the most successful SaaS companies, right? It's time to value. So one of the big benefits of using SaaS versus using on-premise software initially was you can go and you can sign up and you can start using it immediately. It just works, right? And that takes a lot of risk out of the equation for a company that wants to try out drones in their business, because you don't have to spend a lot of money and a lot of time before you know if this is actually going to deliver value. So looking for a solution that can deliver very rapid time to value so that you can get it into your business, you can start seeing how it works for you, I think that's really important. I think very closely related to that is ease of use, right? Because this is a new technology. And if you don't have something that's easy to use, you're going to have to train people how to use it, right? You're going to have to spend a lot of time and a lot of money. And let's face it, everyone in every company is really, really busy. And so how do you de-risk this further? You have a solution that someone can just pick up. They literally can press a button and they can immediately start getting value out of it with very, very little or no training required. So that's something else that I would probably mention. I think, something that is very easy to pick up and use. And I think the last thing that particularly enterprises are going to be looking for is, as you mentioned, great security, right? They want to know that the data that comes onto the platform, which is sometimes sensitive, depending upon what it is going to be held in a way that doesn't pose a risk to that customer. And you also want to know that the company that you're working with is going to be there to support you, right? Big enterprises expect this. When something doesn't work, when they have a question about something, typically these folks don't go to an FAQ. I mean, they will sometimes. They want to be able to pick up the phone, right? Particularly if this is a major initiative, right, that they're deploying throughout their company. And so knowing that they're working with a vendor, choosing a vendor that has really great support, that is really a true partner to them and not just a vendor, I think is something else that big enterprises will be looking for.
Definitely, especially with the nascency of the industry as a whole. They're going to have to really, really count on you and trust you for that. So excellent. Yeah. So in the last 3 years, the drone industry has progressed by leaps and bounds. What do you see the next 3 years bringing? And what do you see the focus? So 2013 was just, getting a drone kind of up in the air and flying it really well. 2014 was, people, are starting to really, make some maps and things. And 2015 was taking that to the next level. And you saw a lot of cloud companies and, those kind of entities emerging. And 2016, to me, looks like we're going to start seeing a little bit more machine learning, computer vision, as evidenced by, on the hardware side, DJI Phantom 4 with its vision avoidance, and also, counting plants and things like that automatically. Where do you see the next 3 years bringing from a technology standpoint in the drone industry?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, first of all, I think the next 3 years are going to be really exciting because in part due to 107, we're going to see I think this technology, even the technologies we think of drone technology today, become widespread, right, throughout a lot of different industries. I mean, today it's sort of an early adopter technology, but we see this every day, obviously, at Drone Deploy. The ROI that businesses can get from even today's drone systems, it's actually just off the charts in a lot of industries. So I think the next 3 years in part will be characterized by the technology that we know really, really well today becoming really broadly used and really broadly adopted. And that's really exciting. I think we will start to see innovation in a few key areas from a technological perspective. You mentioned, I think, sense and avoid. I think we're going to see more and more sophisticated sense and avoid technology make it into drones of all types. I think that is going to be really, really interesting for certain kinds of commercial use cases, in particular things like inspection, right, where you can then automate the inspection process in a little bit more of a seamless way than you can today. I also think frankly, from a battery life perspective, I think we're going to see some really meaningful innovations there. Some of those innovations may unfortunately just take the form of larger physical batteries in these things that can service or enable the servicing of certain kinds of use cases that you can't service today, with a Phantom or an M600. So I think some of it is going to be sort of brute force, but I think we are going to see some additional innovations in the battery world, not just because of the drone space taking off, but also because of electric vehicles and other things that are going to make it possible to get more flight time. And I think that's going to be really exciting for the drone market. And the last thing that I would say from a technological perspective is we are going to see a ton of innovation at the software layer, right? And we see this firsthand at Drone Deploy. But the things that that companies that are focusing on software in the drone space can do, we are just starting to scratch the surface of what is possible. And I think the magical thing that everyone in the software industry or in software around drones should be thinking about is, rapid time to value and solving business problems literally with the press of a button, right? So it's not just about capturing imagery, and it's not just about creating a flight plan, but it's around really, really rapid time to value, helping users figure out, how to solve their problems using a drone with incredible ease. And so I think we made a lot of progress around that at Drone Deploy. I know that we and others are going to make even a lot more progress toward that goal over the next few years.
Definitely. That opens the door up for companies that are traditionally not drone related, like the company Resson, who just closed that $11 million Series B. Analytics companies, computer vision and machine learning. I mean, it just opens up. There's all this new high quality, high res visual data sets that can be analyzed, and there can be insights gathered from those.
Absolutely. And so I'll go a little bit beyond 3 years if you want me to.
Absolutely,
right?
Please do.
And sort of speculate, when I sort of think about 10 years out or 10 to 20 years out, I think we're at the very, very beginning phase of what is essentially a revolution around the use of autonomous vehicles in business, broadly. It's sort of funny that we're starting with things that fly, right? Because arguably things that fly should be the hardest things to build and manage. So it's sort of fun that we're starting there. But it's not too many years away where we're going to see businesses take advantage of things that drive around on the ground, or autonomous ships on the sea, and probably a whole range of other autonomous vehicles and robots that can do all forms of work, and make it easier for businesses to get things done in a more profitable fashion. And I think all of those technologies are going to require a unifying management platform to sort of instruct them as to what they should be doing, to gather data from them when that's relevant, and to just ensure that businesses can get the most value out of them possible. And so I think, it's great that we have things that fly today, and we're going to see many, many more of those things in the air being used by business over the next 3 years, 5 years. But when I fast forward 10 years or more, I think this is just the beginning of a wide-ranging fleet of different kinds of vehicles that businesses of all types and all sizes will take advantage of.
There you have it, folks. If you're starting an unmanned ground vehicle or underwater vehicle company, you might want to get in touch with Emergence and Kevin Spain over there. So I'm going to go ahead, and my last question is actually going to turn the tables a little bit.
Okay.
This is a fairly new podcast. I want my viewers to get to know me a little bit better, or listeners rather. What's one question that you would ask me right now?
Oh, Ian. Well, so it's interesting. I would want to ask you what you are most excited about, right, when it comes to the drone space, because you are really on the front lines, right? Every day you're out there talking to customers and you're talking to prospects here at Drone Deploy. You are hearing on the front lines what companies of all types are thinking about when it comes to drones. What are some of the things you're hearing that are getting you most excited?
That is a great question. I am most excited about automation from all aspects. So we have this level of control of our drones today, which is great to have. We need to have command and control, but automating and really getting that one button press from starting the flight, spinning up the rotors, taking off, gathering the imagery, landing, automated upload, automated analysis, automated report delivery to all the stakeholders that need it. And maybe not even pressing that button, maybe pressing that button once, and then over the next 4 weeks, all that stuff's happening automatically. And I've been talking to a few people who are starting to see that and see the opportunity for that. It does raise legal ramifications, like beyond visual line of sight. Who is the operator? If this is happening all the time, there must be someone that probably has to monitor this. So I'm super excited about that. I'm really excited about machine learning and computer vision because I think that's going to be powering all of this. And it's just a really exciting time. I think that small drones, I for some reason, I imagine drones shrinking in size gradually. And then you're going to have not just one drone flying around, but you're going to have collaborative mapping missions with all different small drones. And you don't buy one drone, you buy a little fleet. And then that fleet will go up and then it'll cover a larger area in a much faster amount of time. Although with that expanding battery technology, right, we might see diminishing returns from that. But that's kind of where I see it going. And so I was going to turn it back around to you, but you kind of already gave me your answer. But yeah, it's been a real joy to talk to you, Kevin. I really appreciate you coming on the show. One of the first people who really even signed up to get any updates from it, and just being so enthusiastic about being one of the first guests. So huge thank you from me. I'm sure the listeners have appreciated it as well. Hopefully we'll be able to do this more often, and I really appreciate the podcasting tips that you gave me before the show started. But if you guys are interested, the audience, in keeping up, you can follow Kevin on Twitter at Kevin Spain, or check out his website, kevinspain.com. Emergence Capital also has a podcast that you can tune into at soundcloud.com/Emergence Capital. So thank you very much again, Kevin.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ian. This was a ton of fun.
Awesome. Alrighty. Everyone, take care. We'll catch up next time. Cheers.